tried to build Eren Yeager's childhood home from Attack on Titan completely from scratch in The Sims 4. Before I started building, I spent quite a while looking at screenshots from the anime because I wanted this build to feel as authentic as possible. We don't actually get to see the house very often, so I had to pay close attention to every little detail that appeared on screen. I also decided that I didn't want to recreate only Eren's house. One thing I really love about Attack on Titan is the atmosphere of Shiganshina. The streets, the houses, the stone walls, and the overall feeling of the district are all such an important part of the story. So instead of placing a single house on an empty lot, I built 2 neighboring houses as well. They aren't exact copies from the anime, but they are there to make the entire area feel much more alive and believable. The first thing I worked on was the exterior of the house. I tried to match the overall proportions and shape as closely as possible. Since The Sims doesn't include the exact same architectural pieces, I had to improvise in a lot of places. Finding the right windows was actually harder than I expected. I spent a long time scrolling through the catalog looking for something that matched the anime. The same goes for the doors. They aren't perfect copies, but I think they capture the same feeling. I also experimented with different wall textures until I found something that looked like old stone. The house inside of the wall have this very rusty handmade appearance, so I wanted the exterior to feel aged instead of looking like a modern family house. Another detail I really wanted to recreate was the area surrounding the house. If you look closely in the anime, there are lots of rocks and uneven ground around the property. Because of that, I placed many different stones and landscaping objects all around the house to recreate the same environment. It might seem like a small detail, but I think it adds so much to the atmosphere. Foundation, I couldn't create the basement exactly the way it appears in the anime. Instead, I had to connect it with a staircase. It isn't completely accurate, but it was the best solution within the building limitation of The Sims. And I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. Once I finished the outside, it was actually time to work on the interior. I started with the first room you see when you entering the house because that's the room we know the best from the anime. This area combines the kitchen, dining room, and living space into one. I tried to recreate the layout first before worrying about the furniture. Getting the overall structure right was much more important than placing decorations immediately. After that, I began choosing furniture that looked as close as possible to what we saw in the anime. Obviously, the Sims doesn't have identical objects, so I focused more on matching the feeling instead of matching every single item exactly the same. I added the dining table where Yeager family shared meal together. The small seating area in the kitchen with wooden furniture. I also choose the wall textures and flooring that look old and simple, fitting the time period. I didn't want the house to feel empty, so I included lots of decorative details, small objects like boxes, baskets, and everyday items make the house feel much more lived in. Even though these aren't the first thing people notice, they really helped to create a believable environment. Since I plan on actually playing with this family later, I also wanted the house to be functional. That's why I decided to add bathrooms, even though we never actually see them in the anime. The first bathroom is entirely my own interpretation because we simply don't know what it looked like. I tried to keep it simple and practical while still fitting the style of the house. Then I moved upstairs. For convenience, I copied the general bathroom layout into the second floor as well. Again, this is more of a gameplay decision than something based on anime. The second floor was definitely the most challenging part of this entire build. We never really get to see these rooms. So almost everything here comes from my imagination. I started with Eren's room. I tried to imagine what his room would look like before everything changed. I didn't want to make it overly decorated because Eren never seemed like someone who cared about luxury or having lots of possessions. Instead, I kept his room fairly simple, adding only the furniture and decorations that felt made sense for his personality and for the period the story takes place in. Next, I created Grisha and Carla's bedroom. Since they are the parents, I gave them the largest room. You might notice things like mirrors or decorative objects that seem slightly more luxurious than what we usually see. That's completely intentional and just part of my own interpretation of the lifestyle. Finally, I created Mikasa's bedroom. For her bedroom, I wanted to reflect her personality. I added a few training related items to suggest that she spent time maintaining her strengths. I decided to give Mikasa her own room instead of sharing one with Eren. Since they are teenagers, I think having separate rooms makes sense, especially because the house has enough space. After finishing upstairs, I moved on what is probably my favorite room in the entire house, the basement. This room carries so much mystery in Attack on Titan. It's where Grisha hid his journals and the secrets about the outside world. So I really wanted to capture that atmosphere. I started by placing the entrance and arranging the furniture to match the original layout as closely as possible. There were several storage cabinets in the anime, but I couldn't find anything identical in The Sims. Instead, I searched for pieces that look similar enough to create the same feeling. Because Grisha was a doctor, I filled the room with medicine bottles, glass flasks, laboratory containers, and different medical supplies. Another important detail was the boxes. There are quite a few boxes scattered around the basement in the anime, so I made sure to place plenty of them. I intentionally arranged everything to look a little messy instead of perfectly organized because I wanted it to feel like a hidden workspace rather than a clean laboratory. I also included several bottles, old books, notebooks, loose papers, and stacks of documents. I'm really happy with how this build turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching me recreate one of the most iconic homes in Attack on Titan. If you have any suggestions or noticed any details that I missed, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next build.